ever get that feeling, like the universe we're living in is just one flavor of reality.
Uh-huh.
Like maybe there are countless other versions out there, some just a tiny bit different, others, who knows, maybe with purple skies and gravity that makes you float.
Yeah, it's a wild thought.
Okay, let's unpack this because today on the deep dive, we're going way back. We're digging into how smart folks throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
philosophers, scientists, thinkers with wonderfully strange ideas have imagined the cosmos.
Right.
And guess what? This whole notion of multiple universes, it's not some brand new sci-fi gizmo.
Not at all.
Nope. This concept, in all sorts of surprising forms, has been floating around for centuries.
And what's fascinating right off the bat is seeing these initial sparks of the idea.
Right.
Even though they came from completely different places, different ways of thinking than our modern science.
Totally different contexts.
Yeah, they still touched on themes that really resonate with what cosmologists are, exploring today.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've got Helge Kragh's book, Conceptions of Cosmos, From Myths to the Accelerating. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding the surprisingly long history of this mind-bending idea.
A great resource for this topic.
Our mission, to trace this journey through time, see how the concept has shifted and changed in scientific thought, and we're going to do it without getting lost in equations or anything too brain melty.
No heavy math today,
Right, we're just following the fascinating evolution of the idea itself.
which, as you said, takes us way back before we had things like telescopes and, the mathematical frameworks we rely on now.
Right. So let's head way back in time. Ancient Egypt, the Near East, what were their takes on the cosmos?
Well, generally those ancient cultures saw the universe as something alive, constantly in motion.
Alive. Interesting.
Yeah, creation wasn't a one-time deal. It was ongoing, woven into the present state of things. So their understanding of the universe and its origins were really kind of intertwined.
So connected.
Exactly. And interestingly, geometry, which is so fundamental to how we see things now, wasn't really a central part of their view.
Huh. So less about perfect spheres and precise distances, more about this living, breathing cosmos. That's a different way to picture it.
It really is.
Now, what about ancient India? I remember reading that their cosmologies were like super layered and inclusive.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Ancient Indian cosmology wasn't about throwing out old ideas for new ones. It was more like building on what already existed, adding new concepts.
Layer upon layer.
Right. This led to these incredibly complex, sometimes seemingly contradictory views. But within that complexity, you find some really early and fascinating ideas.
Like what?
For example, the Rig Veda, which is ancient, mentions the world starting when fire and water came together. It even talks about a time when there was nothing, neither existence nor non-existence.
Wow.
Just darkness covered by darkness, and then this one emerging through heat.
Darkness hidden by darkness. That's pretty powerful imagery, isn't it?
It really is.
Almost sounds a little bit like the nothingness before the Big Bang, in a very poetic sense, right?
In a way, yeah. The parallels are intriguing, even if the context is completely different.
Okay, so from these dynamic myths to these complex, layered views, where do we start to see the first hints of something resembling multiple worlds in a more philosophical way?
For that, we need to travel to ancient Greece and the atomists, particularly Leucippus and his student Democritus.
Ah, the atomists.
Yeah, these thinkers were real revolutionaries for their time. They proposed an infinite universe made up of these tiny, indivisible particles, atoms constantly moving around randomly.
The infinite atoms, infinite space.
And here's where it gets really interesting. They even suggested the possibility of many worlds arising from these random collisions of atoms.
Many worlds in ancient Greece. That's kind of mind-blowing. So like different arrangements of these fundamental particles forming different
That
realities.
seems to be the gist of it, yeah.
So, millennia before the Big Bang Theory, they were already wrestling with the idea of multiple beginnings, driven by fundamental particles. That's a mind-blowing precursor to modern multiverse theories.
Precisely. It was a remarkably bold idea, especially considering the, limited tools they had for observation back then.
Absolute.
Now, within this atomistic framework, Lucretius, a later Roman philosopher who built on their ideas, also introduced this notion of cosmic decay.
Decay.
Yeah, that these worlds, these cosmic structures, weren't eternal, but were subject to breakdown and eventual destruction.
So even back then, the idea of birth and death on a cosmic scale, that's kind of heavy stuff.
It is.
Now, I'm guessing this wasn't the dominant viewpoint, right? I mean, we usually hear about Aristotle and his idea of an eternal, ordered universe.
You're absolutely right. From Aristotle onwards, the prevailing view often assumed a universe that had always existed and would continue indefinitely.
The status quo, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
This essentially put the question of how the universe began cosmogony on the back burner for a long time. And the very definition of universe also narrowed somewhat for astronomers. While it still meant everything physical in practice, it often became associated with the 7 planets orbiting Earth, with the fixed stars being more like a distant backdrop.
So cosmology, as a field of inquiry, kind of took a back seat to the more mathematical aspects of astronomy.
Exactly. Predicting planetary movements became the main focus for a lot of astronomers.
Okay, so for a long time, the single eternal universe was the main story. When do we start to see some cracks in that cosmic consensus? When do thinkers start revisiting these older, more expansive ideas?
The Renaissance is a really pivotal period for this shift. Thinkers began to break away from that strict Aristotelian framework.
Like who?
Nicholas of Cusa, or Cusanus, a fascinating figure comes to mind, based on metaphysical ideas, not empirical observation, mind you.
Based on philosophy.
Yes. He proposed a relatively infinite universe. He argued that it had no fixed center or boundary.
No center, no edge.
And what's particularly insightful is his notion that an observer anywhere in this universe would see a similar picture. He famously described God as the center everywhere and the circumference nowhere.
Center everywhere, circumference nowhere. That's beautifully mind-bending. So no special spot in the cosmos. That must have been a pretty radical departure from the Earth-centered view.
It certainly was a huge conceptual leap.
And then you have Giordano Bruno, right? Didn't he take it even further?
He absolutely did. Bruno built on Copernicus's idea of a sun-centered system.
A heliocentric model.
Right. But Bruno proposed an infinite physical universe packed with countless suns and planets, innumerable worlds.
Wow. Countless suns.
He completely rejected the idea of a sphere of fixed stars as a limit, and, like Cusanus, dismissed the idea of a unique center.
So building on the philosophical groundwork laid by the Renaissance thinkers, he made it more physical, more real.
Exactly. From a relatively infinite universe to a truly infinite one teeming with worlds. The cosmic horizons were definitely expanding in people's minds.
But these were still largely philosophical arguments, right? Or based on sort of theological reasoning in Cusanus's case.
Mostly, yes.
What about actual scientific observations that might have hinted at a larger, maybe even multi-part universe?
Okay, that's where the riddle of the nebulae becomes important.
Nebulae, those fuzzy patches in the sky.
Exactly. For a long time, there's a huge debate about these faint, cloudy objects. The big question was whether they were inside our own galaxy, the Milky Way, or were themselves vast collections of stars.
Island universes, as they were called.
That's the term, yeah. Island universes.
Yeah.
Were they just clouds of gas within our Milky Way, or were they separate galaxies like our own, but incredibly far away?
So a universe of galaxies, potentially?
That was the implication. Even after astronomers like Scheiner saw similarities between the light spectrum of some nebulae like Andromeda and the light spectrum of the sun, suggesting they were made up of stars.
So they looked like they were made of stars.
Right, but the question wasn't fully settled until well into the early 20th century. This uncertainty, though, this possibility that our galaxy wasn't the entirety of existence, certainly helped pave the way for thinking on a much grander scale.
Island universes. I love that term too. It really gives you a sense of these distinct cosmic realms.
It does, doesn't it?
Now, stepping away from galaxies for a moment, were there any other early scientific guesses about multiple universes in a more separate sense? Like not just other galaxies, but whole other realities?
Absolutely. And this one is really quite startling. In 1758, Roger Joseph Boscovich, a really intriguing figure,
Boscovich, okay.
he put forward what can only be called a remarkably daring cosmological speculation. He proposed the possibility of a large number of material and sensible universes existing in the same space.
Wait, in the same
In the
space?
same space, yeah.
Yes.
Separated one from the other, perfectly independent and unable to interact or even be aware of each other.
Oh, universes coexisting in the same space, totally separate. That sounds incredibly modern.
Doesn't it? It's like he jumped way ahead to some of the multiverse theories we hear about today, based on string theory or M theory.
It truly does. It's a remarkable foreshadowing of ideas that would pop up again centuries later.
Amazing.
Yeah, quite prescient.
Now, let's fast forward a couple of centuries to the late 20th. How does our scientific understanding of the universe then influence this idea of multiple universes?
Well, that's when inflationary cosmology enters the picture in a big way.
Inflation, right. Now, for those of us who aren't physicists, the basic idea of inflation is that the very early universe went through this incredibly rapid expansion, right?
Extremely rapid, yes, like ballooning out at an unimaginable speed.
Creating vast stretches of space.
Exactly. And this idea, while initially proposed by Alan Guth in 1981 to solve some mysteries within the standard Big Bang theory.
Like the flatness problem and the horizon problem.
Precisely. It very quickly led to some truly mind-bending implications about multiple universes.
Well, thinkers like Gott, Sato, and especially Andre Lind started exploring how inflation might not just happen once, but could happen repeatedly or continue eternally in different regions of space.
Uh-huh.
This could lead to the creation of not just one, but potentially many, many universes, sometimes called bubble universes.
Bubble universes. Okay. So inflation, the super fast expansion, could have happened in multiple regions, pinching off these separate bubbles.
That's one way to visualize it, yeah. Lindy even joked about how difficult it was to describe creation from nothing, suggesting maybe there wasn't an initial creation in the traditional sense. Maybe it's an ongoing process.
And eternal inflation, constantly spawning new universes.
That's the core of Lindy's later chaotic inflation model from the 90s, an eternally inflating cosmos where new universes are constantly being born.
Wow.
And he even had this rather optimistic view, perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek, but still, that even if life in our universe comes to an end,
Yeah.
it will keep popping up again and again in these other parts of the potentially infinite multiverse.
Optimistic indeed. Like a cosmic fountain of life, constantly bubbling up in different realities. It's certainly a grand, if slightly overwhelming picture.
It definitely stretches the imagination.
Now, before we wrap up our cosmic tour, I remember something about the anthropic principle being relevant to this whole discussion. How does that fit in?
Yes, the anthropic principle, which gained attention in the 1970s, offers another perspective, more philosophical perhaps.
Okay.
Essentially, it points out that the universe we observe must have the properties that allow life, specifically observers like us, to exist within it.
Because otherwise we wouldn't be here to observe it. Seems almost like a tautology, right?
It can seem that way, but it forces us to ask why the universe has these specific properties, the physical constants, the laws of nature, which seem so finely tuned for life.
Ah, the fine-tuning problem.
Exactly. And one possible answer, if you entertain the multiverse idea, is that maybe there's a huge number of universes out there,
An ensemble.
a cosmic landscape, right? Each with different physical laws and constants. And we just happen to exist in one of the rare ones where the conditions are right for life to emerge.
So in a multiverse, our seemingly special universe might just be a matter of cosmic chance. We just happen to win the life-permitting lottery.
That's one interpretation the multiverse offers the anthropic principle, yes.
That's a sobering thought, isn't it? It certainly raises some profound questions about our place in the cosmos and the very nature of reality.
It absolutely does.
Okay, let's try and bring this incredible journey to a close. From ancient myths hinting at multiple realms
To the Greek atomists,
to early scientific inklings of infinity with Cusanus and Bruno,
the island universe debate, Blascovich's coexisting universes.
and finally to these modern cosmological theories suggesting a vast multiverse driven by inflation.
Wow. Yeah.
The idea of more than one universe has indeed had a long and seriously fascinating history.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This idea that what we call the universe might just be one bubble in this immense cosmic foam.
It's both incredibly humbling and utterly exhilarating, you know? It throws a real curveball at our notions of uniqueness and possibility.
Definitely challenges our perspective.
And it leaves you wondering, if these other universes do exist, what on Earth, or perhaps I should say, what beyond Earth are they like?
Are their fundamental laws the same? Different constants?
And if life managed to spark here, could it exist in those other realms, maybe in forms we can't even begin to imagine?
The possibilities seem endless if the multiverse is real.
It truly makes you wonder what other mind-blowing ideas about reality are still out there just waiting to be discovered, right?
Absolutely. What's the next big cosmic surprise?